Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Office of Undergraduate Research Education Series. Today is on Title IX for students. Okay, today is a virtual event. It's being recorded, so please mute yourself and turn off your camera to ensure the best experience. If you have any questions, please use the chat feature or unmute yourself when invited by the speaker. And this is the event evaluation form. We would love everyone to complete this after the session, but please remember the Spur, Europe, and Wilk scholars must complete this in order to receive credit for attending today. And the mission of the Office of Undergraduate Research is to facilitate and promote undergraduate, student, faculty, collaborative research, and creative works in all disciplines throughout the University of Utah campus. And we would like to acknowledge that this land, which is named for the Ute tribe, is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. The U recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between the tribes, states, and the federal government, and we affirm the U's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities. And I'd like to welcome our presenters today. Elaine Newton has recorded the session since she was unable to present live today. And then Fatima Garcia will be here at the end to answer any questions.
Hello, and welcome to the Office of Equal Opportunity and Title IX's training on sexual misconduct. Today we will be covering what is the policy, what is mandatory reporting, and what happens after a mandatory report is submitted. Along the way, we'll talk about what expectations you should have for your own behavior, as well as what kinds of concerns can be reported to the Office of Equal Opportunity. We will continue to talk about the Office of Equal Opportunity, and we'll use OEO for short. So the University of Utah as a whole has responsibilities that are based on state and federal regulation. The university is, of course, going to comply with state and federal law, and the regulations indicate how the institution should respond to concerns of discrimination. The University of Utah has designated the Office of Equal Opportunity, OEO, to be the place to hold those responsibilities for addressing discrimination. And the kind of services that the Office of Equal Opportunity provides are as follows: supportive measures, complaint process, and remedying impacts. So supportive measures are non-disciplinary actions that can support an individual's access, and they have to be non-disciplinary because supportive measures are things that folks can access with or without a complaint process. The complaint process, however, is a kind of systematic way to ask the institution to look into the concerns and determine if a policy has been violated. Remedying impacts, the institution, if it's determined that a policy has been violated, the university has a responsibility to remedy the impacts of discrimination. And this is usually done through sanctions and remedies after an investigation has concluded. So let's talk about what the policy is. So the University of Utah has one policy with many different definitions that fit into this policy. So the policy is our non-discrimination policy. It broadly states that folks have a right to participate at our institution without the fear of being treated differently based on who they are. When individuals have a concern associated with discrimination, they can bring those concerns to the Office of Equal Opportunity. And we use these three pieces to kind of guide, are these concerns associated with the non-discrimination policy? So when people come forward and say, I have experienced something, we're looking at these three pieces to say if it falls under non-discrimination. So somebody is being treated differently. They have reason to believe that they are being treated differently based on a piece of their identity. The law calls this protected classes. And the third, there's an adverse effect to that individual's employment, their education, their participation at the U in some form or fashion. This is the list of protected classes. Likely you've seen this list before. We have race, ethnicity, color, national origin, age, religion, disability, protected veteran status. sex, sexual orientation, gender, gender identity, gender expression, genetic information, pregnancy, and pregnancy-related medical conditions. So this list are, these are the pieces of identity that the non-discrimination policy protects folks from being discriminated based on their connection to one of these protected classes. Sometimes there is a misunderstanding that you have to be a particular race or a particular sex or a particular religion or age to be protected under the non-discrimination policy. But that is not the case. So it doesn't necessarily matter what someone's connection is. If the action or the impact is happening because of that connection, that's really where the problem lies. So it's just as problematic to make hiring decisions based on, people being under the age of 40. That's just as problematic as if I were to make decisions about who I was hiring kind of going 40 and above. So it doesn't actually matter what the age is. It matters if the decision or if the impact is happening because of age. So the types of concerns that come to us under non-discrimination can be a wide variety of concerns that folks are feeling like this is impacting me because of my connection to a protected class. So some of them are, they said I must speak English. So if somebody feels like they are being held to a different expectation because of their language or their ethnicity or their national origin, certainly that can be concerning. They said that my religion is abusive to women and children. They said that my clothes are not appropriate and I'm transgender. When my leader learned about my sexual orientation, they asked the group if everyone was okay working with someone like me. I was told that being pregnant would affect my career or professional options. I was told that I couldn't be on the search committee because there are too many people like me already on it. These examples that I just read through, these are concerns that, somebody says, I think that I am experiencing discrimination based on a protected class. And everyone has a right to bring up those concerns. Whether or not each of these hypotheticals is discrimination is really going to determine on the fact pattern. But it's important for all of us as individuals to really think about how we ensure that our behaviors are, holding everybody to that same expectation, that everybody has the same access, and that we are not stepping into discriminatory spaces by making decisions based on someone's protected class. The last example, my coworker said that people who believe in global warming are ignorant. This is an example of something that's not OEO related. So your connection to a particular political party or a political belief or idea is not a protected class. But if someone comes to the Office of Equal Opportunity and says, I need some help in a non-OEO related space, we'll refer that to a space where somebody can get support. So we try very hard to make sure that there are no wrong doors and that people can get the information they're looking for. So now that we've talked about what the policy is, now let's talk about how this applies to sexual misconduct. So the University of Utah, like I said before, we have one policy of non-discrimination, and under our responsibilities under Title IX, we have the responsibility to address concerns of sex-based harassment because sex-based harassment is a severe form of sex-based discrimination. So Title IX is an education amendment. This is really what Title IX said in 1972 when it was, when the amendment was put forward. And it was really focused on ensuring that based on sex, people were going to have the same access. And that if you received federal funding, you needed to respond to concerns associated with sexual misconduct. So our institution says that sexual misconduct is sexual or intimate behavior that is unwanted or unwelcome. And as you look at the categories that we use here, it's important to note that sexual misconduct is sexual or intimate behavior that's unwanted or unwelcome, and that policy violation is going to hinge on how severe or how frequent the behavior is. So when we're looking at the categories of sexual misconduct, you can see that some of these are pretty severe behaviors. We have things like sexual violence, sexual exploitation, stalking, intimate partner violence, or dating violence. We have fondling and rape, and certainly those types of severe behaviors, one instance of a severe behavior can violate the sexual misconduct guidelines. So Then we have sexual harassment and sex-based harassment, which are more often less severe behaviors that have a pattern. So I think it is important as you're considering your own behavior that these policies are not here to kind of monitor every word that comes out of our mouths, but to instead make sure that we are being proactive about the types of conversations, the types of interactions, the type of behavior that we participate in while we're at the U, to make sure that if the behavior is sexual or intimate in nature, that it is wanted and welcome. Because the Office of Equal Opportunity really looks at, okay, how did somebody know that this behavior was wanted and welcome? Let's talk about what this can really look like. So these are examples of concerns that have come forward to the Office of Equal Opportunity over the course of several years. So graffiti that's sexual in nature that somebody has, drawn onto bathrooms or walls, certainly that's something that could be reported to the Office of Equal Opportunity. Sharing explicit content, maybe this is happening in a workplace where I'm scrolling through Instagram or, another kind of social media platform, and I show something sexually explicit to my coworker. And if that's unwanted and unwelcome behavior, that's something that a person could say, I want to bring this to the Office of Equal Opportunity. People wearing sexually explicit T-shirts, as well as one of the most common concerns that gets kind of brought forward to the Office of Equal Opportunity is sexual jokes or stories. Somebody is maybe trying to be funny and they share a joke that is sexually explicit and they did not determine right beforehand if that was wanted or welcome. Using sexually degrading names, catcalling or whistling at someone, commenting on somebody's body or their sexual abilities. Stalking, as you saw on the previous slide, stalking is also under the umbrella of sexual misconduct. So following someone or monitoring someone's schedule, that could be physically or through social media. Exposing private areas or forcing someone else to expose themselves, lewd gestures. These are all examples of behavior that that could come to the Office of Equal Opportunity. And I think it's important to think about our own behavior, right? How to make sure that I'm being proactive. So before I jump into, commenting on somebody's body or making a joke about something sexually explicit, how am I making sure that that is wanted and welcome? So we're going to kind of get down to the nitty-gritty here, and this is really where the consent guidelines are really, really important. So to determine if something is wanted and welcome, the Office of Equal Opportunity uses consent guidelines. Consent needs to be affirmative, unambiguous, and voluntary. So when we're thinking about affirmative consent, the absence of no does not indicate affirmative consent. So I really need to be proactive before I jump into that story, before I send the sexually explicit content to someone. I need to have data that says this is wanted. And it's really up to me to make sure that I have that data that says, yes, I'm here for it. That could be verbal, that could be nonverbal, but we need to have some piece of data that says, yes, this is wanted behavior. The second piece is unambiguous. So it needs to be clear that the consent given is about this particular behavior. If there's new behavior or escalated behavior, I also need to have consent for that new or escalated behavior. This is particularly important. Maybe my coworker and I have a conversation on Friday. My coworker says, yes, I want to hear this story. I share the story. Everything is fine there. But that doesn't mean that I can share sexually explicit stories or, maybe even new sexually explicit behavior ongoing. I need to have ongoing conversations and check-ins about consent if I'm going to continue to engage in intimate or sexual activity or behavior. And then the third is voluntary. So this is going to be where we make sure that folks are legally, mentally, and physically able to give consent. When we're talking about student spaces where folks are interacting maybe in a social setting, we certainly need to make sure that folks are legally and mentally and physically able to give consent. If they are, under the use of substances and they are not physically or mentally able to give consent, then the individual, right, who wants to participate in some type of intimate behavior, it's really my responsibility to notice if this person is acting normally, if they are really, able to give voluntary consent, I really need to be proactive and think about what am I noticing about this person's behavior, right? Um, if they are really unable to give consent, then I need to know that and know that I can't initiate any type of sexual or intimate behavior with that person. And we're talking about employment spaces. This is maybe where we see more about power dynamics. When a person is in a position of authority, it's really important to make sure that we're really thinking about that authority and that power, and that I'm being really careful about conversations that are sexual or intimate. Because if I'm in a position of authority, it's pretty difficult for someone to feel comfortable saying no when, the person who is instigating something or who is initiating behavior is in charge of their job or is in a position of authority. So, as you're thinking about your own interactions, your own kind of participation at the U, we need to really be proactive and think before I jump into any behavior that is sexual or intimate, I need to be really confident that I have affirmative, unambiguous, and voluntary consent from the folks around me. One thing to add here, as a note, especially for our employees, is that, our institution is a public entity, not only because we physically are open to the public and folks can kind of walk in anytime in our public spaces, but also because we are a public institution and we're a place of higher learning and also a place where the public comes for healthcare. It's really important to remember that these guidelines apply to any behavior that is sexual or intimate in nature. So that could be overheard conversations. If two employees are having a conversation in a public space, we need to make sure that we're really careful not to kind of pull people in without their consent to a conversation or to a behavior that is sexual or intimate in nature. So when it comes to kind of public settings, I would really need to have some data that says that all of the people in this public setting consent to, whatever it is this behavior is. And so I would really recommend thinking quite critically about, is this really the right time? Is this really the right space for this action, this behavior, this conversation? Thinking about, is this the right time? Is this the right place? Can help us really get into these consent guidelines. Okay, the big question is this the right time? Is this the right space? Then we dig in a little bit further. What data indicates to me that, yeah, this is wanted, this is welcome? Do I have unambiguous data? Do I have data that says this right now, this interaction is something that someone is consenting to? And do they have the ability to voluntarily give consent? Are they legally, are they over the age of 18? That's our legally kind of able to give consent. Are they mentally able and are they physically able to give consent? And when we're thinking about that, we really want to dive into thinking about what are the spaces that I really need to be proactive about. And when you're coming to, these types of behavior, you can see looking at these now that most of these kind of have a piece of it where it is not wanted, it is not welcome. Okay, so before I jump into sharing some explicit content, I would need to have some indicators that this is wanted. Before I tell a joke or a story, I really need to be proactive and think about what shows me that this is wanted and welcome. Some of these kind of inherently in their nature do not have consent, like catcalling or commenting on somebody's body or sexual ability. When I'm interacting with someone that I literally don't know, we really need to be very, very proactive about our own behavior to really think about, okay, what indicators shows me that this is wanted and welcome? Okay, so we've talked a little bit about what the policy is, and we've gone through some examples of what kinds of concerns can come up in this space, as well as what the consent guidelines are and how that applies to you and your participation at the U. Now let's talk about one more piece of the policy. So sometimes as individuals, we're really thinking about an intention, but the policy is really focused on impact. So if I participate in some type of unwanted, let's use the hypothetical of a story or a joke that's unwanted or unwelcome. That might not have been my impact. Sorry, that might not have been my intention, might not have been my intention to say something that impacts someone, but if the impact is occurring, that's really what the policy is going to hold me to. The policy is going to hold me to, is this behavior wanted and welcome? What indicators does this person have to say yes or no? And even if my intention was not problematic, if the impact was problematic, that's really what the policy is focused on. So I said before that some questions that can help you are, is this the right time? Is this the right space? Another thing to consider is intention versus impact. Take a second to consider, what's your intention in this moment? And is that really matching the impact? Let's throw ourselves into a slightly imaginative space and think, what is the possible impact? And does that really align with my intentions or with the organization's expectations? I'd like you to pause the video here and take some time to think about what tools you want to use to ensure that your behavior is aligning with these policies. This is really where the rubber meets the road, and practice in our everyday life is really where we get good at asking ourselves these questions. Is this the right time? Is this the right space? Thinking about the possible impact. When we practice, that's really where we get to kind of see and notice, and then we can make adjustments of, if this isn't the right time, right place, okay, I can make some adjustments. If this doesn't match my intention, okay, I can make some adjustments. So I want you to pause here and consider how you want to use these tools. I'm going to go ahead and move on. Here are some suggestions for some recommendations on how to align your own behavior. So like I said before, we want to be proactive. So we might want to ask some questions about boundaries. We might want to do this ahead of time. And like I said before, these don't have to be verbal. They could be nonverbal cues that you're getting. But these types of questions can be really helpful to push us into that proactive space. Do you have time to talk about this right now? Right? I could even start from there. I could start there and say, hey, do you have time to talk about this? I'd really love to know this about you. Are you open to discussing this? Are you open to discussing your dating life? I'd love to talk more about this. Can I give you a hug? Certainly when we're talking about physical behaviors where, somebody's going to physically interact with another person, it is a really important thing to make sure that we're being proactive and asking if this is something that would be helpful or something that's wanted, as opposed to kind of realizing that we've overstepped a boundary and needing to walk those back. The second piece is about giving positive feedback when somebody talks about a boundary. When somebody says, no, I'd really rather not, we need to respond positively. Thanks for letting me know. I appreciate your honesty. I will respect that, and I'm going to ask somebody else. This is a space where when we're thinking about our own behavior, we might have to manage our own feelings of discomfort. We might feel rejected. We might feel embarrassed. We might feel a lot of different things. And it's okay to feel that. And it's still my responsibility to manage my own feelings. It's not the other person's responsibility. So the second part is really about, thinking about, what am I feeling? And if I'm feeling discomfort, if I'm feeling embarrassed, that's okay. I'm going to manage that. But what I'm going to say to the other person is positive feedback. I'm going to let them know that I'm going to respect this boundary. Thank you for letting me know that you'd rather not talk about your dating life. I appreciate that. I'm going to respect that, and I'm going to ask somebody else about their personal experience with, sexual orientation. Doesn't really matter. Sorry, it matters. It matters and is very important to make sure that we are respecting the boundary that somebody sets for us. So we've talked about two different kind of things to consider, right? The questions that I mentioned about possible impact and is this the right time and place, those are proactive questions that I can use in my own space to say, okay, I'm going to think proactively about this. These questions, these boundaries are really focused on getting some information from someone, and then based on that information, I'm going to respect whatever boundary they set. Okay? Okay, so we've talked about what the policy is. Now let's talk about mandatory reporting. So mandatory reporting is a policy we have at the University of Utah that says employees have a responsibility to report concerns of discrimination or sexual misconduct to OEO. So if an employee learns about possible discrimination or sexual misconduct, that employee has a responsibility to refer it to the Office of Equal Opportunity. As you're thinking about your own participation at the U, you may have mandatory reporting responsibilities that you are responsible for. So where are those spaces where you are an employee? And what are the spaces where you likely will have people come to you and disclose that they've experienced sexual misconduct? You might want to kind of preemptively let people know that you're a mandatory reporter. Let people know that, when I'm here as an employee, I'm going to have this responsibility. On the flip side, you're going to have people who are mandatory reporters for things that you disclose. So if you tell an employee that there is possible discrimination or sexual misconduct, that employee is going to have a responsibility to refer that to the Office of Equal Opportunity. Mandatory reporting is a pretty important piece of our university community process. So, like I said before, the university has responsibilities to educate campus, to get information into the hands of people who have brought up concerns about discrimination. And mandatory reporting is the way that our institution has decided to do that. So when someone discloses, whether that is in the accounting, the accounting department, or this is happening on a field trip to St. George, doesn't matter where the concern comes, if someone discloses they've experienced sexual misconduct or discrimination, employees have a responsibility to refer it to OEO, and then OEO is really the place where information about options comes from. So to make sure that the process is consistent, no matter where an employee works, right? They all have that responsibility to report. Certainly, you can access the Office of Equal Opportunity in a couple different ways. We are available over the phone, through email. We are physically located in the law school. But our online form is our preferred method for mandatory reports. So this is a screenshot of the Office of Equal Opportunity's homepage, oeo.utah.edu. And if you're coming here as a mandatory reporter, you click the big red button that says submit a report, and you just give whatever information was disclosed to you. Whatever information the person told you, you tell the Office of Equal Opportunity. And then OEO will do the legwork of getting outreach to the complainant, that person that says, this thing happened to me. Will get outreach to the complainant, as well as, kind of look for spaces where other offices need to be connected, or if there's immediate action that needs to happen based on a threat to safety. Another option here is for you as an individual. If you want to come to the Office of Equal Opportunity and tell your story, you can click submit a report and give whatever information you choose. So you really get to decide how much information you share with the Office of Equal Opportunity if you're coming based on something that happened to you. And you can give as much or as little information as you want to. That's for something that you have experienced. Once I tell another employee, then that employee really has a responsibility to share whatever information they know. Okay. So this is a bit of a distinction. If I'm coming here as an individual who has been impacted by discrimination, I can share as much or as little as I choose. That report can be anonymous, right? That's really something that I have a right to access. If, however, I don't come directly to OEO, I tell my supervisor, I tell my manager, I tell, my TA, then that responsibility to mandatory report is going to be on the shoulders of that employee. Okay. So we've talked about mandatory reporting, and I want to make sure that y'all feel comfortable with this responsibility as an employee. So here's what we do ask for folks to do. Anyone who is receiving disclosures of discrimination or sexual misconduct, we want you to respond compassionately. This is based on the compassionate response training from the victim survivor advocates in the Center for Campus Wellness on the academic campus in Salt Lake. We've borrowed a few of these talking points from the VSAs because we see the same need. So as a mandatory reporter, we really want you to respond compassionately. So first, you're going to really stand in the place of listening. We're going to let the complainant guide the conversation. They get to share what they want to share, and I'm not going to try to compel them to share more details with me. If they choose not to tell me who did, whatever a concern that they're having or reported behavior, if they don't want to tell me who, I'm not going to ask them for more details if they haven't kind of voluntarily given those details. So I'm going to stand from a place of listening and make sure that I'm really focused on letting them guide. When I do need to ask questions, then we're going to move down to step number two, which is support without judgment. So maybe I'm going to ask questions about support. What do you need right now? What are you hoping for? If I'm a manager, maybe I want to see, do you want to take your break early? Do you want to kind of pause and get a snack or some water? We're going to give some options based on support that we can provide, but we're going to be non-judgmental. I'm not here to decide whether this behavior is factual or right or wrong, who's in the right, who's in the wrong. That's really not your responsibility as an employee. And in fact, it really can't be your responsibility as an employee because the Office of Equal Opportunity is the only entity that can determine if discrimination or sexual misconduct has happened. So you as a leader, an employee, maybe even a friend, it kind of depends on who you are watching this, but we're going to focus on support without judgment. And I might need to put aside my own personal connection to the respondent, that person who's allegedly done something discriminatory. I might have to really put aside my own connection to that person and really focus on the person in front of me who's saying, I need some support, I need some help. So we're going to put aside our own personal connections to that person and we're going to focus on our complainant. The complainant, the person who's standing in front of me saying, I need some support. So we're going to give some options for support in the moment. I've mentioned a couple already, but we'll give a couple more examples. But then when I've gotten some information about what they're hoping for, what kind of support would be helpful, then I'm going to be clear about my responsibility to refer information to the Office of Equal Opportunity. So we want to tell people up front, hey, I have this responsibility as a mandatory reporter. There are also some other places that you can keep in your back pocket where folks can optionally go to, right? OEO is a place that when a disclosure occurs, the employee has that mandatory responsibility to get information to OEO, but there are additional places that people can access, like the victim survivor advocates in the Center for Campus Wellness, like the University Counseling Center. If we're on the hospital and clinic side of things, the hospital chaplain, the Resiliency Center. If you're an employee, Bloomquist Hale or the Employee Assistance Program, those are all spaces that somebody could choose to go to and kind of tell their story. And those are going to be confidential spaces. So if I choose a confidential space to go to, that confidential space is not going to have the responsibility to mandatory report. And if I really want to keep something confidential, that means that I need to not tell an employee, right? I'm going to tell somebody who's in that confidentiality space or someone who's not employed with the University of Utah. Okay, so as someone who's responding compassionately to disclosures, we want you to listen, we want you to support without judgment, and then we're going to be transparent and refer information where we need to. We likely have a responsibility to refer it to OEO, but there may be some other places that you might want to check in. So this could sound like, gosh, I'm not exactly sure what to say. Let me go talk to this department leader, and I'll get back to you. You're going to have options. What do you need right now? Right? You might also want to say something like, I have this responsibility as a mandatory reporter, but you have options. You get to decide how you interact with the Office of Equal Opportunity. Okay, so as a mandatory reporter, I want you to pause here and consider, how are you going to ensure that you are responding compassionately to disclosures of sexual misconduct, as well as discrimination? And where might it be appropriate to kind of say up front, hey, I have this responsibility, and remind folks. This might be something you want to review in your class, or as a TA, you might want to remind folks at the beginning of a new semester. Perhaps as an employee, you want to think about where are those spaces where I'm likely to get disclosures, and how can I be proactive? Now let's talk about what happens after a report comes to the Office of Equal Opportunity. So reporting is about getting information to the Office of Equal Opportunity so OEO can send outreach information to complainants. That's really what happens every time a report comes into the Office of Equal Opportunity. Sometimes people think that anytime there's a report, there's going to be an investigation, and that's really not the case. So when a report comes in, it starts off in this intake space. Intake is about getting information to the complainant and letting the complainant decide how they want to move forward. At this beginning stage, supportive measures are available to folks, and supportive measures really are available um, in any time. So it looks like it's a kind of A, B, C process, but these things can kind of move flexibly. So supportive measures are non-disciplinary actions that are really focused on ensuring that an individual is going to maintain access and they're going to get the support that they need. This might be an academic adjustment or a workplace adjustment or a no contact directive. These are going to be supports that don't impact somebody else's access, but can put some boundaries or some expectations around those interactions. If somebody is looking for disciplinary action or for a formal finding from the institution, then they would need to participate in the complaint process that would start an investigation. So, if a complainant wants to request an investigation, they submit an intake form. That intake form gets assigned to an OEO consultant. There's kind of a preliminary review to make sure that it's under the umbrella of non-discrimination. And then if an investigation is going to move forward, the OEO consultant is a neutral party that facilitates this process. So they're going to write out a list of the allegations, send those to the parties, and the parties have a right to provide evidence associated with those allegations. And the Office of Equal Opportunity is there as a private neutral party to make sure that the process is that everyone's rights are respected during this complaint process, as well as to make sure that it is kind of matching what the university says it's going to do. So, everyone has a right to provide evidence associated with investigations. There are some additional options, services through our office. One is informal resolution. This is an option for an investigation where it's mediation. So we could pause the investigation if both parties voluntarily say, yeah, we want to try mediation. And OEO will facilitate that back and forth shuttle mediation between the parties. And if they can come to an agreement, great, fantastic. It can be a little bit more flexible because it's really based on what the two parties can agree to. But if informal resolution does not succeed, then we can go back to the investigation process. Hearings are part of sexual misconduct investigations after an investigation has occurred. If the concern has to do with sexual misconduct, a hearing committee will be called. They will review information. They will review testimony, all of the evidence, and they will make a determination if a policy was violated. Hearings are also part of the appeal process associated with discrimination concerns. So it depends just a little bit about what kind of concern we're talking about. But when it comes to sexual misconduct, if an investigation is going to occur, then a hearing is also going to occur. We've already talked a little bit about education. Education is a service that we provide to our entire community and campus to make sure that folks understand what these policies are and how they apply to them. We're also the place where accommodations for visitors, we are the space where visitors interact with OEO to say, this is the accommodation that I'm looking for. We also do pregnancy modifications for pregnant students. So like I said before, any concerns about discrimination or sexual misconduct, those concerns can come to us. Employees work with HR to request accommodations. And visitors and patients request accommodations through the Office of Equal Opportunity, and pregnant students request modifications through the Office of Equal Opportunity. So, this is a good moment to kind of consider what your connection is and who's the space that you would want to talk to about requesting accommodation or a modification based on pregnancy. But if you have concerns and feel like you've been treated in a discriminatory way during any of those processes, you can bring the concern to OEO. We're also the place that does youth protection investigations for the safety of minors policy. Okay, so we've covered a lot of information today. I really appreciate you, pausing when I've asked you to pause and think about how these policies apply to you, as well as your responsibilities, perhaps as an employee, perhaps as a leader, perhaps as a student. It kind of depends on what your connection is to the U and how these are going to apply to you. But please know that the Office of Equal Opportunity is here to answer questions, and you can reach out to the Office of Equal Opportunity to kind of get more consultation if there's some specific question that you have. Thank you so much for attending this training, and please consider how to personally be proactive about your own behavior. And if you have concerns with discrimination or sexual misconduct, you certainly can always come directly to the Office of Equal Opportunity. Okay, thank you so much.
Now we have Fatima Garcia to answer any questions. Does anybody have any questions? You can put it in the chat. One question from a registrant was, how has Title IX been impacted by recent changes or cuts to the Department of Education?
A great question. Thanks, Shelley. Hi, all. I'm Fatima Garcia. I'm the Supportive Measures Manager for the Office of Equal Opportunity. And so the question again was, how has our office been impacted by recent changes or budget cuts to the Department of Education, my mistake. And the answer is really that we haven't very much been impacted by that. We haven't really been impacted by those changes to the Department of Education at all. We've seen changes come up just through changes that have happened to the Title IX policy in the federal government, but nothing related to the Department of Education.
Thank you, Fatima. Does anyone else have a question? You can just drop it in the chat. Okay, well, I guess we will end early. I just want to remind everybody about the event evaluation. I put the link in the chat. The SPUR Europe and Wilkes Scholars must complete this in order to get credit for attending today. And I just want to remind everybody that the Office of Undergraduate Research, we're located in the SIL Center, which is just east of the parking lot at the Union Building. Our website is our.utah.edu, and you can email us at our@utah.edu. And thank you again, Fatima. We appreciate you being available for questions.